My door is opening. I shall close it. I have a ghost.
Bibliosophie.
Hello, hello, welcome. My name is Sophie. If you've been here before, welcome back. I'm talking to you about nonfiction today. November is Nonfiction November here on YouTube, and so I figured I would get in on it. However, I have also been really overwhelmed by that prospect because it seems like I would need to cover every important book, and of course that's absolutely impossible. So I made it a little easier for myself, and I gave myself very strict parameters. I've been tracking the books I read for pleasure in my iPhone since 2021. I make a long list. So I looked through 2021 and 2022, especially, I think maybe a little bit of 2023, and picked some nonfiction books that I quite liked from those reading years. I have also added the additional parameters that I wanted to talk about books that I have not talked about too much previously on this channel. You'll recognize some books if you're an avid viewer, but generally I tried to pick books that I have not talked about too much. Therefore, I've shied away from books that have made year-end favorites lists. That's why there are no or almost no books from 2023 on the list. And yeah, that's it. There are so many other books that I could recommend, of course, but those are my parameters. Let's get to it. I confess I'm having a really hard time focusing on filming this video right now. I don't know why. I have started and stopped, I think about 10 times, but I can do this. I'm a maximalist, so this is a relatively long list, and as such, I'm going to try to keep my descriptions as short as possible. I think that might be why I'm having a hard time recording. It's more pressure. We'll deal with it. The first chunk of books on this list are all partially memoiristic. They are essays that deal with both the personal but also cultural, political, and analytical. The first of those books is Thick by Tressie McMillan Cottom. This is an essay collection that deals with money, beauty, academia, thinking. What does it mean to be a Black female body in the United States in interaction with those things I just mentioned? What is thickness? So, of course, body thickness is something that we can think of, but also what does it mean to think thickly, non-simplistically? What does it mean to think with a lot of threads? I read this, I think in 2021, and really enjoyed this essay collection. A History of My Brief Body by Billy Ray Belcourt is a book that I have mentioned on this channel before. It's another essay collection that I really love. Belcourt is from the Driftpile Cree Nation and is also a poet, an essayist, scholar, and he's combining this in really beautiful essays about identity, about survival, about family, about the academics of a lineage of queerness, about being indigenous, all in a really interesting way. Heavy, an American memoir by Kiese Laymon. I think, previously mentioned on this channel. This is also dealing with similar topics, but from a different vantage point. What does it mean to be a Black man in America? What does it mean to be a fat Black man in America? We're dealing with body issues, a lot of family trauma, inherited trauma, academia also, learning, teaching, changing, mother-son relationships in sometimes really brutal ways throughout these essays, and really beautifully written. How to Write an Autobiographical Novel by Alexander Chee. Again, a lot of similar topics, but from a different vantage point. I think my descriptions are going to get shorter because it's similar topics from a different perspective with a lot of these essay collections, and also how to write about them, which is an element actually in the previous books that I mentioned, but family history, racial identity, personal history, memories of people, cultural analysis, your place in a culture, and then writing your place in a culture. On the topic of culture and one's place in it, White Girls by Hilton. This is a treasure trove of further reading, further viewing if you want it to be. He covers so many different pieces of writing and movies, music, his reactions to them, his personal history with books and with pieces of popular culture, of high culture, lower culture, his relationship to people, his personal history with people, places, and things in a wonderful way. On a more specific topic, Tiny Moons, A Year of Eating in Shanghai by Mingya Powles is what the title would suggest. It is about food. It is a memoir, it's a series of short essays. It's a very short book in general about the author's relationship to food and how that has to do with her family history, her personal history, her identity, her racial identity, her cultural identity, and kind of traveling through food as a means of figuring out her belongingness, essentially. And yes, it will make you hungry. Bodywork by Melissa Febos is about bodies and about writing about bodies. It is about body trauma and about body memory and how do we talk about ourselves, how do we construct a personal narrative, how does that interact with physical experience, and how do we kind of release that into a body of work. Ooh, I'm glad I did that. How to Read Now by Elaine Castillo. I have also definitely mentioned on this channel before, but hey, you know what? This is a series of essays about the politics of reading, and not just reading as in I am reading a physical book, but also reading as in perceiving media, perceiving culture, the politics of the culture that is given to us, the politics of how we are taught to take it in, the politics of our choices in that taking in, of dissemination, of understanding. I thought this was a wonderful broadening of what is reading and what are the what is the impact of making and reading culture. On the topic of reading, The Hatred of Poetry by Ben Lerner seeks to figure out what is poetry. Why do we have such a tortured relationship to it? People who love reading will still have a very complicated, difficult relationship to poetry specifically. And why? What do we expect of poetry? Do we expect too much? What even qualifies as poetry, etc. This is really short. It's basically just a long essay. So if you like poetry, I recommend it, but I also recommend it if you are one of those people who feels like they just cannot get into poetry. It's a good analysis of kind of that tortured relationship a lot of readers have to that particular form. The Right to Sex, Feminism in the 21st Century by Amia Srinivasan is a series of essays around sex, consent, feminism, the kind of thorny relationship between all of those, and also the fundamentally not that thorny relationship sometimes. Potentially naively or just maybe optimistically, the author, in my opinion, has some very kind of uncomplicated takeaways about consent that I think are interesting. She definitely does not try to oversimplify the topic of feminism, of interpersonal relationships, but what I found interesting and refreshing about this collection is also how she just has some kind of fundamentally optimistic viewpoints about sex and feminism and how they can interplay. 24/7 Late Capitalism and the Ends of Sleep by Jonathan Crary is a short book that is a good introduction to Crary. This is about 24/7 hustle culture, basically, right? And the effects of late capitalism and 24/7 capitalism on not just sleep, but thinking, being in the 21st century. Because Internet by Gretchen McCulloch is a linguistics analysis of internet culture. It is about internet linguistics, meme history, and the ongoing evolution of language on the internet. So it's a very niche but very interesting topic. I have two natural world offerings for you. The first is Metazoa by Peter Godfrey-Smith. The subtitle of this is Animal Life and the Birth of the Mind, and that is what it is. This is a philosopher's investigation of consciousness, the birth of consciousness and subjective experience through the analysis of non-human animals, and specifically a lot of kind of funny sea creatures. Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake is not dissimilar in some of its thought processes and investigations, but it's talking about fungus, how fungi make our worlds, change our minds, and shape our futures. This is about mushrooms and various other fungi, and how investigating those can kind of change our minds about what it means to be human, what it means to be a self. I recommend both of these as really kind of good fodder for thinking, oh, who am I? What am I? What does it mean to be? What does it mean to think about being, even? And finally, we have got a biography, the biography of Thelonious Monk by Robin D.G. Kelly. This is a chunky biography of a fascinating jazz figure that also really investigates not just his interesting life, but how that interacted with the culture of the United States and other places, the politics of the United States and other places, and just kind of music history at large, cultural history at large. Although I said it was far too daunting to try to give you the most important nonfiction books that you have to dig into this month, I am going to give you just a few modern classics that you should explore if you haven't already. This is absolutely not an exhaustive list, of course. This is just a few important modern classics. First up, chronologically, is Pour une morale de l'ambiguïté, The Ethics of Ambiguity by Simone de Beauvoir. If you are interested in Beauvoir's nonfiction, and specifically philosophy, kind of more sociological writing, I suggest this book because it's shorter. It's an interesting overview of parts of philosophy relating to ambiguity. Spoir Mask Blanc, Black Skin, White Faces by Frantz Fanon. The Wretched of the Earth has made it onto a lot of book lists with very good reason for the past year. But I also suggest this absolute classic. It is probably one of Fanon's most important works, and it is really one of the urtexts, if not the urtext, of the colonized experience, specifically in this case, Black colonized people in a white world. What does that have to, what psychological impact does that have on the Black colonized person? Notes of a Native Son by James Baldwin is a fabulous essay collection. Honestly, I suggest that you pick up any essay really of Baldwin's or any essay collection, but I have picked this one in particular because it gives a very good introductory overview of Baldwin's thought process and writing. This is about being Black in America, but also abroad, culture, religion, New York, so many topics. Susan Sontag's Against Interpretation. If you've been curious about Susan Sontag, I think this is a great place to start. This is probably her most famous series of essays, and it includes some of her most famous essays, in fact. And it's a good introduction to her writing style, her thinking style, and also to a lot of other writers and thinkers. Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. I have definitely mentioned this on this channel before. It's a fabulous collection of essays. Again, I suggest you just dip into some Audre Lorde if you haven't previously this month anyway, but this is a really good place to start and contains some of her most famous essays. So if you're looking to read about feminism and specifically Black feminism in America, this is a wonderful book to read. less of an overt classic because it is more recent, but I think could be considered a classic at some point. I'm going to suggest, if you want to read some Annie Ernaux, that you read L'événement, Happening, which is about her illegal abortion as a young woman in the 60s. It's a very short, sometimes harrowing read, and I think a very important and interesting one. There you have it, 21 books that I suggest you look into for Nonfiction November. I also am going to try to read a little bit more nonfiction this month and maybe in December. I have been reading much less nonfiction since I started a doctoral program because I read a fair amount of nonfiction for that, in my research, in my writing. So in my personal kind of off the clock reading, I have read a lot more fiction for the past 2-3 years, but there are various things that I would like to look into this month, and ideally I'll tell you about them in a future wrap up. Ciao, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.